This is a Fulcrum Side Quest mini-sode. Short, focused opinions on psychology and storytelling, personal reflections, unscripted thoughts, maybe even some of your suggestions. Here's Fulcrum.
Welcome to Side Quests, a mini-sode series from Dark Character Profiler. These are the detours, the hidden trails off the main path where we explore the overlooked, the unexpected, and real-world psychological echoes. Let's get into today's side quest.
Dark Character Profiler.
Hello everyone, welcome back to Dark Character Profiler. I'm your host, Fulcrum, and today I'm joined by someone doing incredibly important work in public history and education. My guest is Jenny Chan, president and founder of Pacific Atrocities Education. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct.
Okay.
Thank you for having me today.
Yeah. And you're also the co-host of the podcast Pacific Front Untold?
Yes, that's like a little side project for me, and also James Bradley, who is the author of Flags of Our Fathers. His father raised the flag on Iwo Jima and he wrote the best-selling book Flags of Our Fathers, and there was a Clint Eastwood movie based on the story. So I'm so happy that we're doing that twice a month now.
Oh wow, that's awesome.
Yeah.
So before we kind of dive into the bigger picture for the podcast, I would love to hear your personal why, as in like what inspired you to begin this work and create Pacific Front Untold and the Pacific Atrocities Education.
Yes. So most people, I'm pretty sure your listeners have heard about the Auschwitz, but almost no one knows about Unit 731, or that in one 6-week period in 1937 to 1938, the Japanese troops were in Nanking and they killed more civilians than the entire atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki combined. And basically, the world forgot that it ever happened. And so today I'm here to explain why these stories were buried and also why they still matter and what we get wrong whenever we talk about Asia in World War II. And I want to start with why this topic is so important to me, because my grandma was in Hong Kong during the occupation of Hong Kong by the Japanese. And that happened like 8 hours after Pearl Harbor. But of course, Pearl Harbor is so ingrained in our mind. But within the 8 hours, the Japanese attacked Singapore, Hong Kong, and Malaysia. And then they worked out a deal with Thailand and Burma. And it's very interesting because when I was younger and I was watching anime, and my grandma was like, "Oh, this is brain rot. Japanese people are very evil, blah 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 blah," and I did not believe what she was saying. I thought that she was just being racist. And little did I know, after she passed away, she had this box of items of like military yen and rice rationing coupon, and so then I realized that what she was saying was pretty accurate. And then I later researched about what had happened in Hong Kong where she was living. Basically, her family was forced to exchange all of their belongings and money into military yen, and those money were never exchanged back. And after the war, that became like trash papers. And there was a lot of suffering. For example, they were beheading, potential people who were uprising against the Japanese occupiers, and there were a lot of suffering that had gone through. So it was just something that I thought we really need to document it, because it was a continental size of affair and battle that had happened. And like lower estimate, it would be like 30 million who were perished in Asia, but like the higher estimate is 42 million. And so it's just very important to remember history, because never again means that you actually need to remember what had happened the first time. And I'm not here to like hate on any modern Japan culture or like Japanese people. I'm just here because, a lot of the victims and their families have been asking for basic acknowledgement for 80 years about what had happened to them in Asia.
Wow, that's incredible. I mean, obviously, like you said, that's not something that's widely known. So, I mean, that's pretty insane. And thank you for sharing that. It kind of definitely adds a lot of context to what you do.
Yeah.
And like, I'm sure as our conversation goes on, it'll add a lot more context into like what people didn't know was going on.
Yeah.
So let's zoom out for a moment. World War II is one of the most studied periods in modern history. What happened in the Pacific remains overlooked, minimized, or completely unknown to many people, like you said. So from your perspective, why is this history still so hidden today?
Yeah, so there are probably mostly three reasons about why that is. Number one being the Cold War realpolitik. US needed Japan as an ally. And so immediately after the war, they were giving immunity deals for like the Japanese scientists who were in Unit 731. Then they were also rescuing this guy, Kishinobusuke, who was a Class 8 war criminal. And Eisenhower made him into a prime minister within 10 years with the help of the CIA. Then there are these Asian countries, own political reason. Chinese people probably didn't want to talk about it under Mao. They were still trying to survive. And South Korea had basically the Korean War. They immediately went into the Korean War, and then Vietnam also had its own war going on. And then there was also this lack of images, because when we think about World War II in Asia, we think about the atomic bomb, and then we maybe think about the Japanese internment camps in America. And then we think about Iwo Jima, the flag raising picture, and then we think about Pearl Harbor. And I will argue that like those images don't really have those Chinese or like Asian representation in those pictures of what was actually happening to them.
Right.
And yeah, so I think that's why we don't really talk about that.
Wow. That's pretty crazy. I mean, it's a lot. Like,
Yeah,
I didn't know that, there's this other, it was like, you hear about the Nazis, obviously, and like Auschwitz and, all of the things happening in Germany and Italy and like on the European side, and then of course the Japan side. And it's like, that's kind of like the main focus is like, okay, the Germans were bad and so were the Japanese, and that was it.
Yeah, and then in between, you don't really know what was happening, and then suddenly the war ended with atomic bomb, and then the story ends there, and then suddenly there are victims also, but then they don't talk about what had happened in between Pearl Harbor and the bomb, or even what had happened before Pearl Harbor. 10 years before Pearl Harbor, Japan occupied Manchuria and had a ton of forced laborers and exploited that region. And even before that, Teddy Roosevelt handed Korea to Japan because they thought Teddy Roosevelt called Japan the Yankees of the East and decided that the Japanese deserved to rule Asia, which was a very interesting thing. So, yeah.
Wow, I didn't know that either. There's a lot of things I don't know. So aside from that aspect of as far as Korea, like how did they come into like invading or like getting into those other territories? Other countries.
In terms of Japanese invasion of Korea,
Yeah,
that happened during the Portsmouth Treaty, and Teddy Roosevelt got a Nobel Peace Prize for negotiating and giving Korea to Japan. And then, and it was the Russo-Japanese War, and then, and that's actually a great question. We just released a book about the invasion of Manchuria of 1931, and it's about the Kwantung Army and how they staged this railroad attack and had a false flag war to blame the Chinese people on trying to take over this railway. And so the Kwantung Army started the war and the invasion of Manchuria in 1931. 10 years before Pearl Harbor. And it was funny because I've been like trying to look into this incident, and there was no English literature about this book. So it took us 5 years into researching what had happened in Manchuria, and it's called the Kwantung Army, the rise of the Kwantung Army. And from what we gather, the Kwantung Army basically started the full-on invasion of China.
Wow.
And it's very interesting because, like, and maybe that's why people don't know what happened in World War II. World War II didn't start with Poland, in my opinion, because there were all these other things that were happening also, in like China and in Asia.
Yeah. Like, I guess from my perspective, like, Japan is like this. Yeah. China's like this. So it's like, it's hard to, I guess I should say Japan is really small compared to China. So it's like, how?
Well, because they learned how they sent, during the Meiji Restoration, they sent a lot of the Japanese people to learn from the West about like how to build a modern army, how to, the Choshu and the Choshu domain took over and basically started building, and China was at the time very weak because like 30% of the people were addicted to opium.
That makes sense.
Yeah, and then the army was already deteriorated. They weren't modernized. They didn't have any modern weapons. And so that's how Japan got really a big piece of China.
Wow. So, like, they occupied a part of China, right? So, like, was there, like, intermingling at that time?
That's a great question. So in Kishi Nobusuke, who was a war criminal, class A war criminal, and then later became prime minister of Japan, he wrote something like, "Oh, Chinese people are like toilet water. The Japanese and Chinese people cannot mingle."
Oh my God.
So at that time, there were a lot of racist theories too, right? And you have to think about the context. Like before World War II, even in US, Chinese people were excluded from 1882 Chinese Exclusionary Act. So like they faced a lot of discrimination, and that's why they were able to, and that's why in occupied Manchuria, they were able to use exploited Manchurian labor just because of the concept of Chinese people being inferior.
Wow. That's insanity. I can't believe he compared them to, what did you say, toilet water?
Yes, I can actually send you some quotes, and then maybe you can, well, actually, maybe that would be too much for your Spotify description.
That's okay. So I know you kind of wanted to talk about like two atrocities that occurred, and I think you said previously Unit 731 was like a big one you wanted to talk about. So tell me about that.
Because Unit 731 is such a fascinating story, and I think more people need to hear about it. So basically, there was this scientist named Ishishiro who had read the Geneva Convention and thought, wow, if germ is so powerful that these Westerners are writing rules about it, we need to weaponize germ warfare. And so he was a biologist, and during Russo-Japanese War, he knew that Japanese people were having problem with water and dysentery, and so he made a water filter, and then he peed into the water filter in front of the emperor, and then drank the filter pee. And then the emperor was very impressed because, he was able to filter his own pee, and then gave him funding.
I'm sorry for.
I started laughing because you started laughing. But that was how he got his funding. His initial funding came from the emperor because the emperor was so impressed. And so then he had a lab in Tokyo, but having a lab in Tokyo was way too high profile because people can see what he was doing. He was then doing human experimentation.
Right.
So when Japan got invaded Manchuria, he took like a road trip in Manchuria and thought, this is like my chance to make it big in Manchuria. There's all this land. Of course, I can set up a laboratory here. So he set up a laboratory, and then he was doing. He took over a soy sauce factory and started doing human experimentation. But the most interesting part about this human experimentation was then that is his prisoners ran away because they somehow they were able to fool the guards, and then they ran away, and so he thought, and then they started telling people what was happening, and so he thought, well, actually, in order for this to succeed, there needs to be no survivor. So he then went over and took over a whole village. So he built like movie theater in this village. He built like his own laboratory. He built dormitory for the Japanese scientists. And then he was doing full on human experimentations about like plague, and like he was one of his chief scientists, Naito, developed a technology on how to powderize anthrax. And so then they were doing all these human experimentation. He had his own jet where he would like drop biological bombs onto like his victims who were tied to stakes to see like the reaction. That he also, because the area was so cold that like he would tie his victims onto a stake outside to see what would happen to their limbs and like body parts and whatnot. Then he would chop down their limbs and see what happens inside, like how to treat in order to see how to treat frostbite. And then after the war, basically the CIA gave him immunity because they thought that this kind of research cannot be done anywhere else in the modern world and is not ethical. But since this research was already done, let's just take it. Let's just buy it from these people.
Sounds about right.
I thought that history was very fascinating just because of like all these like details on like how these things actually worked out. And then
that's insane. I mean, like, so I hate to say it, but like a lot of because it makes it sound like you're almost like shining a light on the whole thing, but like a lot of things that we have now came out of World War II. Like, I think penicillin I think, yeah. So like that's one of the things, but that's on like the European side, as far as I know. But it's like I can't like put into words like good things came out of such terrible like things.
Yeah.
I'm like, oh my god.
So yeah, sorry to if your audience is getting grossed out.
Oh, it's okay.
I did not mean to help you lose subscribers, but yeah.
Oh no. I'm sure they'll be okay. So was there anything else that like
Yes, I wanted to go back to Rape of Nanking because I was just talking about that in the beginning of our podcast. It's very interesting because there was like this contest. They killed like 300,000 civilians, but like that number is contested. But then like if you think about it, even killing 5 people is called a massacre, right?
Right.
And so there were these like 2 officers who were just having like a killing contest to see who can kill 100 people with their sword first. And it was like then in like 1937, this was like publicized in Japanese news and they were all cheering, and that like really raised the morale of taking over China. And one of the officers was like, oh, I had such a good time killing people that I got to 150 without realizing. Let's just start to count from 0 again. And I thought that was very interesting because it's not just a genocide, but they publicize and glorify that kind of genocide. So it's just like, at what point does society get to that kind of like fanatical phase?
That's like psychopathic.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, well, antisocial, technically. But
yeah, so yeah, I just wanted to bring that up as well because it needs to take a while for society to get to that moment where they're like, where that kind of story could boost morale. But yeah.
So they were just like bored and they were like, I know what we could do.
Right.
We could kill a bunch of people and see how it goes. Like, what? What?
Yeah, that's basically it. And because of also the rhetoric at that time, right? Like if you're comparing your inferior race of Chinese people to your own people, then wouldn't you be excited they were excited to kill because they're killing this inferior race.
See, what gets me is like, I don't understand where that ideology comes from. Like, who decides? How do you get it in your head that, like, it just doesn't make any sense. Like, Hitler was, he was Jewish, like of Jewish ancestry, and he's like, let's kill all the Jews. Like, what? Except for
it's very interesting that they would be like, oh yeah, exactly, they just pick one like race and then they like focus on like how to make and then just focus on that kind of like and then they have some kind of rhetoric to make it so then that group of people is no longer people and that you're somehow above them. And then I think that's a very dangerous area to get into.
I just don't get it. Like, how does that even occur in somebody's, like, you gotta be narcissistic or something.
Exactly.
That's insane. And so the massacre, what was it called again?
The Nanjing Massacre.
Okay. Is there anything else about the Unit 731, or is it mainly just like human experimentation and biological warfare?
Biological warfare is actually, that's a great question, actually. Unit 731 was also very interesting in the fact that, like, it's not just human experimentation, right? It's biological warfare as well. And so if you disseminate, like, glanders and anthrax into someone's soil, that stuff can last forever.
Right.
And so, like, even for decades after the war, there were these Chinese victims who could not farm on their own land because every single time that they were like trying to farm on their own land in like regions like Yiwu, then they contract anthrax and like a mixture of like anthrax and glanders. So then to the point that their flesh was like rotting.
Oh.
Yeah, and so then their limbs were falling off, and it wasn't until like 2014 did they figure out that they can do skin grafting and whatnot.
Right.
And you can look this up. Like in 2002, there was a woman who tried to sue Japan for Unit 731, and the Japanese court admitted that they did it, but then they would not pay any reparation or like any damages that these victims face. And so, you know, obviously we have Geneva Convention, but like who is protecting everyone from being like, for example, what if one day someone just decided to drop some things into the soil? It's like
it's so easy and undetectable.
Right.
Almost.
And then like decades later, people are still like suffering from that kind of weapon. So it's just interesting to kind of like think about the future that way.
Yeah. So I did do a little bit of research, and like something that popped up was this concept of comfort women.
Oh yeah. That was anher insane thing that I learned. I went and visited one of the comfort women, like one of the regions where they had like comfort women. There was a base for Japan for the Japanese soldiers in Shanxi. And when you talk about like comfort women, most of the time people think about Korean comfort women, but there were also Chinese comfort women. And I got to visit them in like 2015 before they died. And it's just heartbreaking because it was just a camp where they corralled these women into like a comfort station. And then they get raped like 10, 15 times a day. And then one of these women I interviewed ended up like being pregnant. And then her mom was like, well, I don't know what to do with the baby. So they buried the baby while it was still alive in some cave. And so then that's like a taboo topic. So then like, not only were they like, I think victims with like the Japanese soldiers and whatnot, I think they were also victims in their own society.
Right. Because then it's like they're not pure anymore in, a traditional sense. And it's like, they're never going to be able to get married. They're never going to,
Right.
Wow. And that was in China or
in Korea.
Okay,
and also
Korea.
Basically everywhere that Japan occupied.
How many countries were they occupying?
They occupied Korea. Korea had it the worst because they were actually occupied like for decades, even before World War II got started. Right. Then they occupied China. And then actually let's pull on the full list of occupation.
Yeah, I'm down for it.
Because if you pull on the whole map, it's like very big. And that's why I'm like, wow, why is no one talking about all of this area that was invaded? They occupy Taiwan. They occupy most of China's coast, the Philippines, Malaya, Indonesia, Guam, New Guinea, Yeah, and it's actually interesting because if we talk about Singapore, right?
Mhm.
The Prime Minister of Singapore, Lee Kuan Yew, who ruled Singapore after it claimed independence, he also was almost killed by Japanese because they thought that he got rounded up, and then he saw around him of like all these guys who were rounded up. And then he said, well, actually, these people look like some kind of anti-Japanese faction. So he somehow got out of this like group. And then he later learned that that group that were rounded up with him ended up being machine gunned. And like, so had that happened, we would not have Singapore how it looks like today. And like, had he actually not escaped death and like didn't survive, we wouldn't have Singapore today.
Wow.
No.
That's crazy. How does like and like to compare it, I guess, it's like how many countries the British Empire like had control over.
I think British Empire had more countries controlled over, but this is like atrocities that happened within a very short time period, if you think about it.
Yeah, like
yeah. It's like it's the brutality that had happened, right? But we don't really talk about the atrocities that happened under the British ruling either, I feel like.
Well, yes, I could see like not as many of them are talked about, but
yeah,
I mean, this is definitely something that's way less talked about than, the British stuff.
Yeah.
Were there any other like atrocities that you wanted to discuss other than
Yeah, maybe we can talk about it next time on your podcast.
Yeah. Okay. And I had some questions.
Okay, cool.
So my podcast is like, I take a character from books, TV, stuff like that, and I kind of like apply psychology to them and like diagnose them with quotations as if they were a real person. So like and I have I have a master's degree in forensic psychology. So with that, I kind of wanted to ask some like questions on that side of things. So like what long-term historical denial, let me rephrase. What does long-term historical denial do to survivors, families, or even national memory? Like,
I think people get frustrated, really, because even today, Prime Minister the Sinai gets like she frequently goes to Yasukuni Shrine, which is like a shrine for war criminal, which is insane. If you imagine like a shrine for Hitler and the likes,
right?
That would never happen in Germany, and I think that really leads to a gap in Koreans and Chinese being frustrated with Japan.
Right.
And it's funny because I think in San Francisco there were efforts to try to establish a comfort woman statue, which they did. And during like the hearing, a Japanese American was like, "Oh, Iris Chang came to my dreams." Iris Chang was the woman who wrote The Rape of Nanking, and she was like, "Oh, Iris Chang came to my dream and said that the Rape of Nanking was fake and blah blah blah." Like, can you imagine if a German American is like showing up to a public hearing and saying that the Holocaust is fake?
You know what? There are some people who are Holocaust deniers, and I'm like, I don't know how you deny that. Like, it's right there. It's
So I think it does lead to a lot more trauma and like frustration, and then it's also very gaslighting too, because then a lot of people are like, "Oh, it happened so long ago," blah blah blah. But it's just like, hey, why don't we actually? The point of our organization is so that we can acknowledge historical truth and then just move on, right? But it's very hard to start dialogue with certain groups of people.
Well, and especially like it's like oh god, like the physical things, the physical atrocities that happened, like even though it didn't happen to like say their grandchildren or whatever, like that still affects like through generations later.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Like the psychological trauma, it's a generational trauma.
Yes.
Not just one person and everything's good.
Right.
And that kind of brings me into my next question. How does intergenerational trauma show up in the stories you've documented?
Recently we have started interviewing sons of like descendants of Imperial Japanese armies as well, just to hear their side of things. And they would tell us that like their father come back home with PTSD. They're like shouting in their dreams too, because of what they're doing, what they were doing in the war. And and then this guy was very interesting. His father worked at Unit 1644, which was in Nanjing, and like it's very hard to research into what they were all doing, because like a lot of the documents were burned, or like classic Japanese is more like a blend of Japanese and Chinese than like modern Japanese. And he was saying that organizations like ours really need to exist, because even he's curious about what his father was doing during the war in like this Unit 1644, which sounded like Unit 731. And also in terms of like other intergenerational trauma, like I think a lot of Koreans also, I don't know if you heard about this, they have like every Wednesday they have demonstration against the Japanese in front of the Japanese embassy. And all they're doing is to try to get Japan to even acknowledge what had happened between, during when Korea was their colony. And you can also see that today there are a lot of Chinese people who are still fighting with the Japanese people on like social media over what had happened. And so for people to say like, oh, it happened 80 years ago, it doesn't even matter anymore.
No, it still affects people.
Right, never again means nothing if people don't know what had happened in the first time.
Right.
Yeah, and healing needs us to all acknowledge our historical truth.
Right. And kind of my last question that has to do like with psychology, what are the psychological consequences when an atrocity is widely known in one region but erased in another?
I think people get gaslit, really. They're like, oh, these like stunts. I think recently I saw on Chinese social media that this historian went into Yasukuni Shrine and then the Yasukuni Museum. And the Yasukuni Museum is basically like a place where they kind of erase history. And then the historian from China went and said like, oh, this is actually not true. This is not what happened in Nanjing. And then it sparked all these like outraged people on the internet too. So like I think people don't want to be gaslit into like telling us what or like an erased narrative. So,
Right.
yeah. What do you think? What do you think is happening since you're a psychologist?
Well, I'm not licensed, but I mean, I think you're right that like people from the cultures that were affected, not like the countries doing the deed, but the people who were receiving the deed against them, I think they would definitely be gaslit into like trying to like minimize or even just say, oh, it didn't, you don't need to worry about it.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, I think that's
especially considering the shrine that you've brought up several times now. Like they're saying one thing, but in reality, it's something entirely different.
right, exactly. So yeah, I think that really, and also international relationship cannot happen if one region is trying to erase historical truth and another region is trying to install and pretend that nothing happened.
Right. Yeah, I completely agree.
Yeah.
So I think this was a great episode. Do you have any questions for me?
I don't have any questions.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, all right.
Great. Thank you so much for having me.
Of course. And so as we wrap up today's conversation, I want to shift toward something actionable for listeners who are hearing some of this history for the very first time or who want to support preservation efforts. What can they do?
Yes, they can go on our website, pacificatrocities.org, and they can definitely see if they can maybe sign up for our internship program, for our research program, or also just make a donation.
Okay.
And subscribing to our YouTube also helps a lot.
Okay. Our
YouTube is Pacific Front Untold.
Okay. I will definitely put both of those links in the description for this episode. Are there any, outside of your organization, is there any other ones that you would recommend or that are, acknowledging?
Not really. Yeah, I think when I was trying to find a job, like in this area, it was mostly just there was no job available that really incorporated how I want to do it. So, yeah.
Well, then there you go. You made it the way you wanted it.
Yes. Yep. All right. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. And if you have any other like social media or anything, feel free to shout that out. And I will also put links in the comments as well.
Okay,
or
great.
In the description.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.
Dark Character Profiler.
That's the end of this side quest minisode. Thank you for coming along with me on a journey off the beaten path. See you next time.
That's it for today's side quest. If you have any topic suggestions, send us an email at darkcharacterprofiler@gmail.com. Don't forget, Dark Character Profiler returns next week. Thank you for listening.